Hi there, welcome to the Wednesday edition. Today we're going to be talking about media bias and campus culture. Across the nation, there has been an awakening of the dishonesty in our nation's media where we rely on our sources to guide us in our path of life. And across the nation, there has been a culture on college campuses of false movements and false propaganda that connects to the media bias across our generation and the future generations of our children. Today, joining us to comment on this is Cabot Phillips, the editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. Thank you for tuning into the Wednesday edition.
So here with us today, we have Cabot Phillips. Cabot Phillips is the editor-in-chief for Campus Reform. Prior to joining Campus Reform, he spent time working on numerous campaigns, most recently as the digital grassroots director for Marco Rubio's presidential bid. Phillips is also a YouTube partner, creating and starring in numerous videos, which have amassed over 100 million views across varying online platforms. In 2016, Phillips was named to Red Alert Politics 30 under 30 list of the nation's most influential young conservatives. Cabot, thanks for joining us today. Would you want to talk for a minute about what you do with Campus Reform?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be on with you guys. So I'm the editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. We are an online news publication dedicated to exposing the liberal bias on college campuses. So we are 24/7 covering all the craziness, whether it's professors, misusing their positions, ranting in class, indoctrinating, giving biased assignments, biased courseworks, things like that, or administrators treating conservative groups differently because of their political affiliations, denying them funding, canceling events on campus because they don't like their political ideologies, or just mistreating them, denying them their First Amendment free speech rights on campus. That's all stuff we cover. And we also cover any kind of suppression of ideas on campus, from protesters to Antifa, from administrators, even down to legislators. That's all stuff that we cover, and we try and shine a light on it. Our favorite slogan is "Light is the best disinfectant," and we think that college campuses need to have a light shown on them. And I think a lot of people around the country are finally starting to wake up to the fact that our campuses are so biased one way towards the political left, and how that's a problem for everyone. So the goal of Campus Reform, we have a team of full-time paid staffers here in Arlington, Virginia, a full team of reporters and editors that write stories about what's going on. And then we have about 100 campus correspondents on the ground who are student reporters working in freelance capacity that are detailing what's going on, kind of the eyes and ears on campus. And so they help expose what's going on as well. And so again, the main purpose is just to show what's going on campus, and hopefully create an environment on campus where free speech and dialogue and debate and all those things are welcomed, which I'm sure you guys know is not always the case. But it's what we're trying to work towards, make people aware of what's going on. And so in that capacity, obviously I'm editor-in-chief, kind of serve on the general big picture direction and doing, videos on different campuses. I've spoken on over 100 different college campuses, interviewing students, speaking at events, whatever it is, and doing media, that kind of thing, to try and get people talking about the importance of college campuses. So that's kind of me. That's what we do at Campus Reform. So I'm happy to talk about that. Whatever you guys want to get into, I'm happy to be on with y'all.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful for what Campus Reform does, and also had the pleasure of getting to hear you come speak out to Texas Tech back in October, and that was really cool.
Yeah, the thing I mainly remember from Lubbock is that I got to Texas Tech thinking, oh, I'm going to Texas. It's October. I'll be good.
Yeah.
Shirts and shorts, and I got there and it was literally snowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a good time. You guys took me out to a good pizza spot there, so I got my fill of Lubbock, and all I remember is just being frozen solid the whole time I was there.
Yeah, Lubbock is one of the probably stranger parts of Texas when it comes to weather. But I'm really grateful for what Campus Reform does. Campus Reform actually covered just recently. There was a Texas Tech professor that was talking about Donald Trump, and he said something just off the wall about if Donald Trump were to die from coronavirus, maybe he would consider becoming religious. And I don't think really anybody covered it except for Campus Reform. So you're right about light being the best disinfectant. Hardly anyone was covering that, but campus reform was all over it. So really grateful for what y'all do over there.
Absolutely. And that's one of my favorite things is making professors aware of the fact that, hey, if you're if your salary is paid for by taxpayers, if you're at a public school and you're misusing your position, saying a bunch of crazy stuff, we're going to report on it. And a lot of times professors will reach out and they'll send me DMs. They'll reach out and they'll say, this is ridiculous that you're, trying to sick your readers on us. You're trying to get people to come after us. I say, I'm not doing any of that. I'm not telling anyone to go after you. All I'm saying is if you're going to proudly say these crazy things in class and on social media, then why would you not be proud of them reaching as large an audience as possible? And I think a lot of times professors' responses to us covering them shows that they know they shouldn't be saying things like that in the first place. It shows their hypocrisy. And I do think a lot of times they want as many people to hear them as long as everyone agrees with them. And they're so used to this echo chamber that a lot of times at the first sign of being pushed back upon, they don't really know how to respond to it because they're not used to having actually other ideas pushed on them. So at the first sign of it, they'll say, well, I'm being harassed or people are, threatening me. And it's like, no, that's not actually happening. You're just having people that, are pushing back on you because of what you're saying and you just don't like it. So that's a big element of what we cover as professors, again, making these outlandish, ridiculous claims. It's always one way. It's always anti-conservative, anti-libertarian. It's never, against the left. And if it was against the left, that would also be wrong. Okay. Like that's not the point of a professor. It's not the point of a teacher, but it is always one-sided.
Yeah, we definitely need our generation to be a little more defensive of themselves. Really quick, before I ask this question, I just want to give just a few examples to make it clear to the listeners. The example that always sticks to my head when I think about media bias is the time the Washington Post, whenever the military killed al-Baghdadi, posted the austere religious scholar, and then it was removed a few days later. If you're going to post something, keep it up. That's how you feel, keep it up. I don't delete tweets unless, I think it's stupid, but it's not because I'm embarrassed or something. So with, that kind of thing, the New York Times posting an editorial about how the DNC should be the ones that are in charge of investigating the sexual assault claims on Joe Biden, like just have them do the emails at that point. I mean, with these two examples, how do you think that, because we can talk about millennials and our parents and the parents of our parents all we want, but us as Generation Z and you working on campuses so frequently, how do you think that our generation is reacting? And do you think that will change as these come to light? As the work that campus reform does evolves, do you think our reactions would change?
Yeah, well, first off, touching another just wonderful example of the liberal bias in media, and you touched on a little bit, but the way that people are handling the sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden is just the perfect encapsulation of bias in media. Look, I don't know if the claims are legitimate. I'm not going to pretend to say that they are or aren't. But the fact is, we should get facts. We should be able to say, hey, this is a serious allegation. Let's look into it. And for just the crowd of believe all women, for the same people that spent years breathlessly reminding all of us that if someone accuses someone that you should believe the accuser no matter what, you should give them their day to share all the details. Now to hear those same people say, well, believe all women, but that's not really what we meant, okay? This person's accusing someone that we like. This is a guy that, I know Joe Biden. I trust Joe Biden. I don't believe these allegations against him. So it's just so clear, believe all women only means that when it's people that are going after conservatives and Republicans, or at least people the media doesn't like. And now when it's their golden boy in Joe Biden, they just kind of prop him up and say, well, we don't believe her. We didn't mean that woman. We meant believe all women generally, as long as we get to decide. So just a ridiculous example of the way that things are treated differently. Again, that's not me saying if the claims are legitimate. I don't know if they are, in the same way that I didn't know if the claims against Brett Kavanaugh were legitimate. But it is absolutely just insane to see the way that things are handled differently when it's people on different sides. Now, when we talk about people our age and the reaction that's going to have, I think the first thing it's doing is it's starting to just degrade people's trust in any institution. There really aren't any institutions, I think, that people in the next generation trust or view as reputable. And the media, I think, is they're kind of done in. I don't see there being a situation where people that are growing up now in their teens and their early 20s get older and say, you know what, I used to not trust the media, but now I do. I think it's permanent damage that's being done right now. And I think that people view the media as kind of a political activism thing, and they don't really view it as impartial, fact tellers. And so I do think that, when we see that kind of bias in the media, I do think that it has long-term impacts where people just don't trust them. And I talk about this a little bit when I'm on different campuses about kind of this boy who cried wolf scenario, where I do think that because the media is so constantly telling people these ridiculous over-the-top claims, and that people start to not believe them. It's kind of like the world is ending thing, where everything for the past couple of years, the media has told us the world would end with, if Trump gets elected, the world's going to end, and it didn't happen. And the stock market's going to crash the second Trump gets in office, and then it starts hitting record highs. And then if net neutrality passes, the internet will never be the same. Everyone will die. And like, wait a second, that actually wasn't true. And
yeah, if Trump gets elected, I'm going to Canada.
Yeah, I'm going to Canada. That didn't happen. Well, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, if they get put on the court, the world's going to end and things will never be the same. And when there's thing after thing, I just think people start to look around and they're like, hey, this isn't actually the case. Like, you guys keep telling me all this stuff is true. It's not true. And so I think that it is going to have kind of this long-term impact on the way that people view media, which actually is, I think, a good thing as a whole. I think that it's good that when you've got this like elite media class that's starting to wither and die, which I think is a good thing for America. And so you've got so many other alternatives for people to find their news. And I think that's why there's such a demand for things like this podcast you guys are doing, this show you guys are doing. There's a demand for alternative ways to find opinions and to find, information. And so I think that's a good thing, and that our generation and the next generations are seeking out alternative ways to get educated. And there's, that's kind of the beauty of a free market, is that there's going to be ways for things to evolve. So I think that this is the future of media. I think it's podcasts, it's YouTube, it's social media. Those are the ways that I think in the future the news is going to be disseminated throughout the culture and throughout society. And I think that's a good thing. The more people that have small amounts of control of the media, it's better than a few people having a lot of control. And I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny you brought up the Kavanaugh thing, because our generation in particular was quick to that Kavanaugh reaction, was quick to it. I don't know if you've seen the popular Change My Mind video by Steven Crowder, where that girl, Steven Crowder, tried to act like he didn't know about the Kavanaugh situation. And she's like, you don't know Brett Kavanaugh, the rapist, the whatever? And then Steven gave her all the facts, and then she called the police to get him removed or whatever.
Yeah,
we did. Our generation...
We did something similar with campus reform during the impeachment trial. I just went to a campus and I just pretended like I didn't really know anything about the impeachment. And I just said, so do you think Donald Trump should be impeached? I saw this in the news, and everyone's, of course he should be impeached. Get him out, impeach him. And I was like, wow, it's like, what did he do? Like, what's going on? What was the impeachable thing? And everyone's like, well, I mean, I don't really know what it was, but like everyone's saying he should be impeached, so he needs to. It's just people just have these hot takes, and it's like, hey, if you want to have a hot take, good for you, but you better be able to defend it or at least back it up somewhat. I actually got kicked off campus that day. Security came over and detained me and took my ID and everything. And they
Which campus was this?
This was at Marymount University, which it is a private school. So, I didn't want to go all like, am I being detained, go all that route. And, I respect private property. I respect property rights. So I said, you know what, I will leave. But if it's public school, there ain't no way I was going to.
Yeah, that's my least favorite thing about going to a private school is if we want to bring someone in, they can always be kicked off.
Yeah, and that's
definitely.
That's kind of a problem too, or not a problem. I think private schools are a great thing, and I think it's good for America. But there obviously are certain rights that can be forfeited when you're in a private school that aren't there at public schools. And that's the beauty of America, is that you can choose to associate with whomever you please. And private schools obviously have a little more right to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of I have friends and family that kind of laugh at me because I'm more optimistic in my generation and in my elected officials. Now, not full optimism. I'm not, naive, but I do have that hope that with the work that, like, for example, all of us are part of Young Conservatives of Texas. We each have our own chapters. I have hope that, like, with what I'm doing, I'm promoting that, our generation be the ones to take it down. Because all this media bias, and we'll get into campus culture here in a few minutes, it's not going to get taken down unless our generation does something. Because the generations above us are old enough to have done something about it. And so it's all these things that we complain about, it comes down to us ultimately. And I personally get optimistic that we're going to be the opposite of millennials. And what I mean by that is the whole, for example, they say that our generation is going to be worse than millennials, that we're going to get into identity politics, that we're going to be worse with, the whole getting offended every time somebody says something borderline, out there. But if you look at memes online where it's usually a fake profile, I know this is a funny example, but it's true. I mean, memes are looked at by our entire generation. And if you look at them, a lot of them have some racist things in there. And our generation shares them, have millions of likes, because the profiles are fake. But when it comes down to the reflection, it shows that our values are a certain way. And I bring up optimism. I also bring up concern, because when all white males in our entire generation are growing up with insecurity about when somebody asks them where they're from, they can't say they're white. That's going to cause some problems in a few years if you think about it, because you're creating a severity of insecurity, which we're also talking about campus culture here. So, do you have any optimism that our generation wakes up, or do you think that we're going to be just as naive and lazy and in the parents' basement as millennials?
Well, I'm optimistic in the sense that I think there is a window. I think that if there's anything that young people traditionally don't like, it's being told what to believe. And I do think there's a certain element where right now in culture, there's so much pressure of young people being told you have to be liberal, you have to be on the political left. And at a certain point, I do think there's a backfire of stop telling me what to think. Like, I'm tired of the man kind of, going that route. And there is a deep desire within most people to want to stick it to the man and to kind of be rebellious. And there right now, there is nothing more rebellious than being a conservative. There's nothing more rebellious, in my opinion, if you're a young person, than saying, I voted for a Republican, I voted for Donald Trump, or saying, I actually am conservative. That is incredibly rebellious. And so I think there's a window there, and there is a certain element where I think that a lot of young people, especially in Generation Z coming up, I do think there is a natural inclination towards freedom, towards wanting to be able to say or wear whatever they want and kind of be out there, and there's kind of this idea of this shock factor that a lot of young people love, and that only is acceptable if there's freedom of expression and things like that. And so I'm optimistic when I see that. I'm obviously scared about the next generation when you understand what who they look up to, who their role models are, what's being taught to them, and the values being instilled in them. But there are certain elements I'm optimistic on, I think if we're going to win over those people, though, we're going to have to provide an alternative. And I think that too many times on the political right, we get caught up in this just call out culture, and we get caught up in this just mindset of, I'm just going to own the libs. I'm just going to call them out. I'm just going to try and, melt as many snowflakes as possible and destroy people and own them and all this. And obviously there's a place for that. And sometimes that's very easy to do. And I understand the entertainment value that comes with that. And I understand a lot of times the need to expose ignorance and to expose flawed ideologies and flawed thinking. I have no problem with that. But if that's your end goal, which I think for a lot of conservatives it is the end goal, then what's the point of being in politics? What's the point of being in activism if you're not winning people over? And I think that a lot of people on the right, we got to get better at providing an alternative. We got to get better at saying, okay, well, here's the problem with your ideology, and not leave it there, but actually say, and here's a solution. Here's something that I think would be better. Here's something that would actually help. As opposed to just saying, your side sucks, and then leaving it there. It's got to be, yeah, I do think your side sucks, but here's an alternative, and here's something that's actually better. I think that that's the way that you're going to win people over, as opposed to just saying, your side sucks. And again, that might sound all lovey-dovey and fluffy, and it might be harder to actually do in practice when you're actually having those conversations and having those interactions, but I still think that should be the end goal. I think too many people in politics don't think through what their end goal is. They just think in the short term, hey, what's going to get the most views? What's going to, get the most laughter and applause in the moment? They don't actually think, hey, if that's all anyone does, we're not going to have any growth. We're not going to have anyone that expands into our movement. And that's the mindset I think we need to have is, what's the end goal? Is it to actually win people over? Is it to win hearts and minds? Is it to make sure that the next generation is more conservative than the last? Because if we have 3 or 4 generations in a row that are just like millennials, then we're going to be in trouble as a country.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And that's why I'm happy to be in Young Conservatives of Texas. And that's why when I wanted to start a political thing, I chose YCT because our main thing is to be effective. And that's why, like, I've been to YLS training at Leadership Institute, and, we learned about campus reform. And that's why I like all these organizations because, like, I don't know if y'all have ever been on your social medias and seen the clickbait where it's, this did this, and then you watch the video and it's like 15 minutes, and then whatever the title was never actually happens. And that's politically, I mean, it's on all things, but people on the right are so focused on just getting views. They all want to be speakers at CPAC, and they all want to be speakers at Turning Point, but they actually don't do anything when it comes down to it. And like books like Donald Trump Jr.'s book of Triggered. I like the book, but I'm scared that he's going to keep coming out with books called Triggered. You know what I mean? That whole idea of talking about the left all the time. So we'll get out there and change their mind. Get out there and work on. And I'm not criticizing Don Jr. It was a good book. It needed to be written. But there are people like him that all they do is every single year release the same concept. So those are really good points that you bring up that the right needs to remember.
Yeah, and on the clickbait stuff, like I think part of it comes down to like us as a culture, like no longer incentivizing it. Like clickbait is a thing, and that type of media and that type of political presence is a thing because there's a market for it. Because when you see that video and it's like at the 3-minute and 14-second mark, you will be in tears. It's like a lot of times I find myself being like, well, I kind of want to know if it's gonna make me cry or not. I kind of got to watch it.
Yeah, definitely.
Of this puppy or whatever, and I watch it. I'm like, well, that was stupid. Why'd I do that? And then like the next day I see another article and it's like, what Hillary Clinton just said changes everything. You won't believe. I'm like, oh gosh.
I think I saw that one and I watched it.
Yeah, and I click it and it's nothing. I click it and it's stupid. But I always forget, like, hey, every time I click that, I'm like prolonging this trend. I'm making this more likely to happen in the future. So
they're making money on you clicking it if they're not demonetized.
It comes down to us as consumers deciding, hey, we're going to stop incentivizing this. And of course, I run a publication. There are plenty of times where we'll have a story and I will be picking a headline and I'll say, man, I could really twist this headline and really capitalize on it and get 3 times as many views, but it's not worth it. I'm not going to compromise on the integrity of what we're doing. And also, I don't think people realize that route is beneficial in the short term. You will get success in the short term. And that's why so many people do it, because it's really easy to build a serious rapport and to make people trust you. And once you lose that trust, I think it's very difficult to bring back. And so to anyone watching and listening, I would just say, if you're going to go that route, you might find some short-term success, but it's very hard to replicate in the long run.
Yeah, that's an extreme. I'm sorry, Skylar. I'll be quick. That's a very good point that, short-term success, it feels so great. And then you find yourself in a year with your conservative movement just kind of dying off. And it's like, well, you're not focused on the long. You're talking about changing people's lives. What we do at YCT in college is so that when they have kids, that what we did gets transferred through, that we want to make change in the long term, because that's the only way it's effective. And that's why I love what campus reform does. I'm sorry, Skylar, go ahead.
Yeah, and in a similar vein, we see what happens on CNN and MSNBC and even Fox News to some degree, where you have these panels that are just tearing each other apart, and you have the Trump guy, and then you have usually the host himself is fairly left, like Don Lemon or Anderson Cooper, but you have this panel that's just tearing each other to shreds, and it's super entertaining. It's not actually very informative, but incredibly high entertainment value. But after a while, you're like, it kind of gets exhausting of seeing they're not talking about any good, like anything new. They're not bringing any actual value to the viewers, but it is extremely entertaining. And I think people get pretty tired of that because it's just them battling each other on the news. And so
yeah, and I've experienced that firsthand in doing media stuff, and I've done Fox and CNN and those networks and stuff, and I think obviously I as a conservative and as someone that grew up watching Fox and goes on regularly now, I love what Fox does, and I think they're a really important voice. And there are plenty of shows there that I'm a huge fan of, and I really appreciate what they bring to the table. But there are certainly times where I'll do an interview on whatever network, whatever show, and it's just nonstop yelling and arguing. And a lot of times you leave the interview and you're like, I'm glad I stood up for what I believed in. I'm glad I did that. I'm glad that I presented that opinion. But at the same time, it's like, man, did anyone's mind get changed? Or were there just people that, believed that the liberal person were just cheering them on and saying what an idiot I was? And then the conservative people saying, yeah, Cabot's the man, and that liberal, they're such an idiot. And I think that sometimes we treat political media the way we treat sports, where it's kind of like just a big blood match, death match to the end. And I do think that's one reason that we've seen this polarization in America happen, and why it's so hard to win people over is because there's just not a huge market for reasonable, substantive debate and conversations. And sadly, people a lot of times are more intent on scoring the death blow and kind of treating like a UFC match as opposed to politics. And again, I've seen it firsthand. I know how tempting it is. I know how hard it is to go into those settings. And so I'm not trying to fault people that are in those environments and do have shows like that and that's kind of their shtick when they go on, is just yelling at people and being the flamethrower. I understand how hard it is, and there is some role for that. But ultimately, I don't think it's productive for America and for a healthy society.
Yeah, that was a really good point. Cabot makes some really good points today. I'm going to have to listen later with a notebook and take some notes on it because there's so much information. Let's move into a little bit more of campus culture. And campus culture can mean many things. What I think of when I hear campus culture is the whole, I'm going to get offended every time I hear something that I don't agree with. I'm going to, the professor's going to call me an idiot because, I can't use Canvas correctly or something. That's what I think of when I hear campus culture. But what I also think of is, for example, Harvard having to fire various professors for their involvement in China. All these different things, just the simple corruption, the $200,000 a year. I get that it's Ivy League, but that's so stupid. $800,000 of debt. Unless you're a lawyer for Facebook, you're never paying that off. It's really never happening. And I say that, I'm not a boomer. Facebook lawyers make $1,200 an hour. 40 hours a week, you're looking at over $1 million a year. So I'm not a boomer like, oh my God, Zuckerberg. No, I'm serious. They make so much money. We'll give a little bit more, campus culture through these conversations. You'll learn a little bit more. And if listeners have any questions, feel free to hit us up at Saving Republic, and we'll give you a more in detailed thing, because it's such a broad topic that you have to, get the fine line in it. But we do want to dive into a little bit of the whole China Harvard deal. Skylar, do you want to give us a little bit more of a question on that with your research on it?
Yeah, Kevin. Well, I mean, we've seen in the news, we've seen a lot of China's ties with college campuses. There was something going on at Texas A&M. There's also, it was just either today or yesterday, there was news that Harvard University canceled, it was like a forum talking about Hong Kong, because their university president was meeting with Xi Jinping, and it coincided with it. So I guess they didn't want that to conflict, or maybe they just sort of wanted to appease Xi Jinping. So, and I know campus reform has covered a little bit of that, a little bit of China's ties with college campuses. So I was kind of curious, what's your take on China sort of funding, the Chinese government funding college universities, American universities, and sort of what you've seen on that front?
Yeah, I think this is going to be something that future generations look back on, and they're like, what in the world? Why did America allow the Chinese Communist Party to have such infiltration on their college campuses? So for people that don't know what's going on, China views American campuses as a soft target for their propaganda efforts. They literally have a ministry of propaganda, the Communist Party there in China, that admits, yes, we are going on college campuses in America to try and spread our propaganda. Now, they do this through a few ways. One is just simple funding. They'll donate through their different, financial subsidiaries, whatever, millions of dollars to universities. A lot of times these university donations will have strings attached. So the Chinese government will donate all this money and then say, oh, but then we're entitled to the research you use this for, and we get that information, so they can get sensitive information and research that way. They have these Confucius Institutes, which they sound really nice. On a college campus, there's 86 of them in America right now. There were about 120, and they've started to slowly be shut down as people realize what they are. But there's Chinese Communist Party funded centers on 86 campuses in America. They're these big, beautiful, shiny buildings. They're cultural exchange centers, according to the Chinese government. The universities say, yeah, come on, build them on campus. We'd love to have that. we love culture. We're multicultural. This is all great. Yeah, bring the Chinese language courses and teach our students about your history and your culture. And it sounds great. And if that's what they were doing, more power to them. But that's not what they're doing. They're actually using that to influence curriculums on campus. That's their goal, is to influence curriculum, to teach a revisionist history of China, to also monitor the way that the modern Chinese government is being viewed on campus, to try and infiltrate classrooms with information that's positive towards President Xi and other Communist Party information, things like that. So they're trying to influence what's going on, spread propaganda, and then use all of that leverage on campus for the good of the Chinese Communist Party. This isn't some conspiracy, okay? This sounds I'm sounding like that meme of the guy.
You're not a conspiracist. No.
The Department of Defense and the Pentagon have both come out separately and said, yes, this is a propaganda effort. So actually this week, Congress announced that they were launching a congressional investigation into Chinese interference on college campuses. It's something that's going on. It is happening. So I personally think it's time for the federal government. I'm very hesitant on calling on the federal government to do anything. But I do think there's a role for them to say, from a national security standpoint, no, we're not going to allow the Chinese government to have facilities on our college campuses. And so we've seen other examples of this where, they donate money, they get things in response. We've even seen professors get arrested for smuggling information to the Chinese government and then downplaying it. There was a Harvard professor recently that was smuggling sensitive medical information to the Chinese government. There have been multiple students at Duke University, up in Illinois, and other places out in California, where students have been paid by the government of China to smuggle sensitive information. One student got caught trying to bring a USB core or a USB device full of missile information from the U.S. Defense Department that he'd gotten on campus back to the Chinese. So all these things are happening. They're all dangerous, and it is just funny that you've got the Democrat Party and people on the left in academia who spent the last 4 years going on and on about the danger of interference in our elections from foreign entities, saying we need to make sure that there's no foreign interference in our elections, which, yes, we should make sure. But there was almost no evidence that actually any foreign interference did take place. Those same people are now allowing foreign interference on our college campuses. They're allowing legitimate foreign interference into our education system, but they don't care about that. It is kind of this selective outrage. And it's also funny that college campuses, the home of diversity and the home of, of human rights and the home of inclusion and equity and all those things, which at their core are good things, are now welcoming the presence of a regime that routinely suppresses 1 billion people, that throws people in concentration camps based on their religion and denies basic free speech rights to everyone in the country. That doesn't sound very inclusive, very in line with diversity and equity either. But they have no problem with them and having an expanded presence, because many times it gives them the sense of being open-minded by allowing these Chinese centers on campus, and there's a financial tie-in as well. So again, this would be like, if during the Cold War we had a bunch of Soviet Union-funded centers on college campuses spreading Soviet propaganda. Now we look back on it and say, what in the world? Why would they do that? But that's what's happening with the Chinese government, which, slightly different setting than the Cold War, but you got to think that China is our biggest adversary right now on the global stage.
Yeah, it's so disturbing that it does sound like a conspiracy, but it is true. There have been professors arrested for sharing sensitive information with the Chinese government. So it's really concerning.
And I want to point out too, I started going on a rant about this, but I just think people need to wake up to what's going on the China ties. So a lot of times I think people are hesitant to speak out against the Chinese influence on college campuses. And also, I think people are hesitant to call out the Chinese government as a whole when it comes to their handling of coronavirus because of political correctness. People are terrified, hey, if I call out China for this, if I blame the Chinese government for this, I'm going to be called a racist. People are going to think that I'm anti-Chinese as opposed to anti-Chinese government. Those are two very different things, okay? We should be able to point out the Chinese government's gross human rights violations, point out how dangerous it is for us to give them a foothold on campus and give them a free pass when it comes to their handling of the coronavirus. We should be able to call those things out without being labeled racist or intolerant, because we are attacking a regime, okay? We're not attacking a people group. We're not attacking Asian Americans or Chinese Americans, because individually, there are plenty of great people and we're not attacking them. Again, it's the regime. Right. But I think people are so afraid of that, they don't want to call it out and they just kind of let it go on. And so I think the political correctness element does play a role in all this as well.
I have a ton of sympathy. Sorry. I I have a ton of sympathy for the Chinese people because they really are being oppressed. And there was the one of the first people was the doctor that actually died from coronavirus that was speaking out, and he was suppressed. So I have a ton of sympathy for the Chinese people. I think we're gonna look back on what the Chinese government has done and realize what a gross abuse of human rights this is.
Yeah, definitely. And those are good points that Cabot made, especially about the China stuff. Because for me, earlier I talked about optimism. I think that our generation is gonna get sick of always being concerned about offending somebody, always being concerned about, am I being politically correct? Am I crossing a line? I think it's a ticking time bomb before we just don't care. And that's dangerous, but at the same time, I think it needs to happen for a temporary period of time so that we get realigned in our true beliefs and not the beliefs that we're supposed to have. And then the future will be better. So I'm optimistic that the time bomb erupts, and call me whatever. That's just that's I am. And the other thing is, it's funny that Cabot mentions all that, because I still remember the clip from a few months ago or whenever it was of Joe Biden saying, "Why are we concerned about China behavior? Why are we concerned about?" And I don't think it's a coincidence that his son had that $1 billion deal done on Air Force Two and all that in China. I'm like, huh. And why am I being labeled a conspiracist for connecting the dots? I shouldn't be an idiot for looking at the information. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Anyway, sorry about that little rant. We love rants on this podcast. That's how we're gonna save the republic, by ranting.
See, that's the benefit to being the host, is that you guys get to talk about whatever you want. No one can tell you no. You can. That's the beauty of all that. But yeah, it's funny though. Like, just on the kind of a closing point on the China stuff, you've got 1 billion people that would die for the right to be able to speak freely. And now here in America, we've got millions of people that are fighting for the right to be censored. Like, they are people that want to be censored. They want to have, they want to have freedoms curtailed because they think it will make them feel safe. And I just think there's this trade-off of people not realizing your sense of safety, your sense of not having to encounter things you don't like, does not supersede freedom, and at least it shouldn't. And I do get scared that I think people mistakenly think that by giving up their freedoms that they're going to live in a more safe society. And it's just important to remind people, once you give up those freedoms, they don't come back. Once you give away freedom, governments are not in the business of granting freedoms back to people once they've been taken away. There are not examples in history of government taking power later on saying, we shouldn't have taken this power. Here, let's peacefully give it back to you. That's not how things work. So I think it's important for us to remind people, it always happens incrementally, but when you slowly, incrementally give up those rights in the name of safety, they don't come back. And I think it's Thomas Jefferson who said, those that would sacrifice liberty for safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Some kind of quote like that. But I think the mantra is the same here when applied.
I will say that, I was just going to say, I know, going back to the college campus stuff, I have a twin brother who goes to Baylor, and he's mentioned that they, this is probably a lot less harmless than smuggling information, but he's mentioned that they have, a Chinese rowing team, and Baylor, has hosted them, and they get, special lunch lines and stuff. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. And then they had, I guess Jake's my brother, he's part of YCT at Baylor. And he had mentioned that they did a Hong Kong event, I guess this past fall semester. And I guess the Chinese students really hated on them for that. So I just thought that was interesting because I would never really expect that from Baylor. But then again, it's not just private schools that do this. We've seen in the news recently, UT has gotten in trouble for professors, I guess, regarding China. So I don't know. I think it's just interesting that it's more schools than you would think, I guess.
Yeah, it's always the school you don't expect that I think is the case we're going on here.
Yeah, and that's also, I'm a twin myself as well, so twin power. But I think also, it's important to point out, a lot of times the students, international students from China are a lot of times victims, where the Chinese government will say, we will allow you to go to the United States to study. But once they get there, they'll say, hey, now that you're there, if you don't bring us back information, we will, and they'll make threats. And a lot of times, so a lot of times students are, essentially exploited and are threatened by the Chinese government. for those things. But it's something to keep an eye out on. And again, for anyone watching, listening, if you encounter something like that, please send it to us at Campus Reform. We will gladly cover that and expose what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing is, Campus Reform doing this work will make a change. I mean, it will. And even if it's in one person, I mean, it's effective. Fortunately, I started my chapter in the fall. Unfortunately, we were setting up in the fall, and in the spring we were going to go full throttle, and then COVID happened. So we weren't really able to, get a bunch of members. But I have, about 10 members, and the ones of those members, I feel so fulfilled and satisfied because just one is plenty. You just need to make, because with one becomes all the rest. And so with Campus Reform and Leadership Institute and all the wonderful donors that give to them, NYCT and all these things, we're making a change. And people don't, it may not, just because it's not trending on YouTube or on Twitter, it's still happening. And I mean, anyway, I think that just needs to be remembered.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to realize also, like, when it comes to campus climate, campus activism, a lot of times it's really difficult to be the first few people to get something going. That is the hard part. It's once it gets going, it's much easier to be a follower, obviously, than standing up and being a leader. And I always try to remind people, like, hey, you may look at your campus culture, and if there isn't a big conservative movement there, you might think, there's just no one here that's conservative. This sucks. I'm never going to make a difference. But once you get the ball rolling, once you step up and start that group and stand up in class and recruit on campus, I promise you there are more people that agree with you than you think. It's just a lot of people are wanting to follow. A lot of people are wanting to see someone else stand up first, and they're going to come. And people are always shocked at how many people there are that agree with them. It's just they don't want to be the first to do it. And so by starting that group, by getting a few trusted people there to help you recruit, to help you grow, you will have people come up that are going to tell you, oh, dang, I didn't know there was a group like this. I didn't know there were other people. Thank you for doing this. Because, again, it's a lot easier to get the ball rolling, once you have people there. But it takes a few people that are bold and willing to stand up and get things started. And so, hopefully that's an encouragement to everybody listening that, one person truly can start a movement on a campus. And I always tell people there are very few opportunities in life to leave a legacy. And I think there's a difference between starting something on your campus and then it dying out once you leave. But a legacy is something where you can start something and you leave it in a position where it's thriving. You leave it in a position where you can leave and it continues on and it grows, and you come back a decade later and there's a thriving movement on your campus. That's something you can point to and say, that's a legacy. That's something that I started that lived on after I was gone there. And I think that as conservatives on campus, because there are so few of us, we do have a chance to kind of start with a blank slate, and we can know that the efforts that we're doing, because there are so few people like us on campus, are going to live on beyond us. And if we can, create a solid base, get groups started like YCT, get things going, that we can come back years down the road and know I helped start that. That's my legacy. That's something really special and unique that not a lot of people get a chance to do. And I do think that there's an obligation for young conservatives to speak up. And we may think, oh, this is great. I have the right to speak up. I have the right to do this. I think you don't just have a right to do it. I think you have an obligation to do it. If you're young, if you believe that your opinions are right, if you believe that the conservative ideology is the best to help America and help people, you have an obligation to stand up, to be bold, to speak out on your campus. And so I want to challenge people listening to do that, to not just sit around and say, well, I know I'm right, but I don't really want to go tell people about it. If you know you're right and you keep it to yourself, then you're not doing your job, and you're being selfish, and in a way you're being cowardly. And I think that it's on us I'm not trying to shame anyone to speaking up, but you can't just say, I know I'm right, I know this is great, but I'm going to keep it for myself. You got to share with people. You got to be bold. You got to be willing to step out. And so that's my challenge to everyone listening.
Yeah, I think legacy is the word to take away from today's podcast.
Yeah, right. I agree with all of what you said. I'm extremely optimistic that young conservatives all over college campuses are going to be the ones to bear the banner of free speech. Cal Berkeley had the free speech movement in the 60s, but I think it's going to be the right that cares about free expression and free speech on campuses. Cabot, I want to say thanks for joining us. We really appreciate this conversation. And if you have any social media that you want to plug, go ahead and thanks for coming on here.
Absolutely. My social media is just Cabot, CABOT _Phillips with 2 L's. And then we're at Campus Reform. That's our other social media, YouTube channel, all that. But guys, I really appreciate you having me on. I love what YCT does. I'm always impressed by your organization and the stuff you guys get done in Texas. And it's just always encouraging for me to get to talk with you guys. So let me know if I can ever be of help. And again, for anyone listening, campusreform.org. Send us tips. Let us know how we can help on campus. But again, I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thanks for joining us.
If you like this content, please like, subscribe, share it. If you hated it, like, subscribe, and share it. Thanks for tuning in.